Recreation Director, and I am joined here today by Mark Sewell, who is our Parks and Recreation Business Analyst. So we'll be following up on the report that staff made to you on the golf course at your October 7th meeting, returning with additional information that the committee requested. And also in your packet was a copy of the consultant's report that we talked about at our last meeting. So just quickly, in today's presentation, we're going to overview, not spend a lot of time on information that we already shared with you. But we have added some additional projections for the next 10 years, depending on the level of play. We'll review the options. We are bringing you additional information on general fund support in Parks and Recreation programs that you asked for. We also, staff have been pulling together some additional information on trends in municipal golf, especially locally, so we thought that would be of interest. And overviewing the 5 operating models that are the focus of the consultant's report, and then talking about where do we go from here. So again, this is just beginning the discussion. We're identifying a pending financial challenge at the golf course given trends that we've seen, and so we are starting the discussion about options that City Council can consider going forward. A final decision on whether or not to make a change at the golf course is needed by June 2015. So nationally, as well as regionally, we are seeing declining interest in the sport of golf. This has been going on for a number of years. Fewer people are playing, and those who are playing less frequently. We have seen an overexpansion of golf courses across the country that has come into play. So that play is now distributed over more courses. That certainly has happened here locally to us as well. And the golf industry was very affected by the recession. So people made different choices with their money for their leisure activities. For the Santa Barbara Golf Club, our local golf market has become far more competitive. Courses that were more mid to higher end now, because they're experiencing all the same challenges as us, they are reducing their price points, so they are now more competitive with us. And that's really, it affects us because we have to be careful about our price increases, and it can price us out of the market pretty quickly. So increasing our pricing to solve our problem is not really a good solution. And we showed this to you the last time. These are the annual rounds, starting with 1982 and going through 2014. So you can see that play exceeded 100,000 rounds back in the 80s and just at the start of the 90s, and then play has consistently been declining since then. We have been relatively stable for the last 4 or 5 years. So that's a good thing. But we are, much less play than we saw over the years. I thought it would be helpful to just revisit both the revenue and the expense associated with the golf course. So not necessarily numbers. We're about a $2 million a year operation. But 79% of the revenue at the golf course comes from fees, the golf fees. So again, the golf fund is an enterprise fund. It does not receive any general fund or tax support. So 79% of the revenue comes from greens fees paid by golfers. The concessions, the restaurant and the pro shop contribute another 16%, and then we have minor revenue beyond that. On the expense side, 50% of our operating costs are salary and benefits. And if you combine supplies and allocated costs, which are simply computer, risk management, insurance, facility maintenance, things like that, that's another 27%. We have about 13% in debt and 10% committed to capital.
Sure.
Mr. White?
What's the, I didn't hear those exact words, allocated costs. Can you clarify that, please?
Are part of every city department program operating budget.
So it's like the overhead, so to speak?
It's actually the costs that we pay for the maintenance of the city structures. So whether it's the phone lines, the computer lines, the computer equipment, it's insurance costs, workers' comp costs, all of, well, I guess workers' comp.
So $145,000. Okay, great. Thank you.
I had a question on this slide as well, too. Transfers to capital. So that is a fund that is planning ahead for future capital improvements that are needed. Is that 10% amount a fully funded amount to knock off all the projects on the Golf Master Plan?
That's about average. We have, in putting these projections together, shown what should be spent at the golf course to maintain the facilities. During the last few years, we deferred a lot of maintenance, and we are now playing catch-up. So we believe that in this budget and in our projections, that what we have projected is investing appropriate amounts back into the facility.
And as long as we're grinding on this a little bit, yeah, the debt costs, I mean, you're saying the deferring. Can you refresh our memory on what that, I mean, it seems to me that was borrowing money to finish off a project, and anyway, maybe give us a little bit of clarification on that.
2 projects. One was the renovation of the clubhouse, which was done, I think, back in the 90s. And so we are still paying off that debt. And then the Golf Course Safety Improvement Master Plan had a number of capital projects that were associated with it. The golf course had built up a capital reserve that paid for a lot of that. And then there was a loan from the general fund to pay for the balance, and a repayment plan that the golf course would repay the general fund. And over the last 3 years, probably, as we've had more financial challenges, staff have come back to City Council and asked to renegotiate those terms so that it would lessen the impact on the golf course now and spread that impact over a longer period of time. And so we've done that.
And so how much debt is it then at this point?
It's roughly about $200,000 a year.
But I mean total debt. The total, what's the total amount? $1.3 million. $1.3 million left on that debt, and so then that's 7 years left on the payback or something like that. Great, thanks.
Yeah.
So, and I'm sorry, one more time around. Really, I think to understand this, yeah, I think it is. It's a critically important slide. So, in the past, we were apparently not putting enough money into a capital budget, hence the need to borrow to do those projects. And so, we're going to pay that debt down over time, and when that's done, we won't have that debt again because now we're putting the proper amount into the capital reserve that would prevent having to borrow in the future. So there's a point in time. Is that true? What I just said.
I would say that I think it keeps up with the normal major maintenance. The clubhouse and the golf course safety improvement plans, I wouldn't say those were normal maintenance. Those were a complete renovation of a building, ground up, and then on the golf course, it was a pretty substantial number of different project elements as part of the master plan. So the If there were additional projects that were identified that were more significant improvements, then we could be talking about needing to plan about how we would fund some kind of a multi-million-dollar improvement. We are not including that here. I think we're really trying to not overinflate numbers, but to be pretty realistic. I think that this amount of money keeps us investing on a regular basis. Mark, would you say that's...
Yes, I would agree. I would suggest that our capital plan is to maintain the status and the quality of the golf course as it currently is to the golfers. We have deferred a number of maintenance projects, which are the things perhaps the golfers don't tend to see. We have a number of maintenance buildings which are, on their last legs and things like that, stuff which really has to be done over time, and that would be funded within our projections and our planning. Just the major, huge, like I say, new building type of idea would be the thing where we'd be looking for some other financing.
Is there a master plan that contemplates those kind of changes, and is there a time frame associated with those kinds of changes?
There is a master plan, more for the golf course. And years ago, the golf course conducted a study with a golf consultant to come up with measures that could be taken to improve the safety at the golf course. Our golf course is constrained on a site that is much smaller than most 18-hole courses with a driving range and associated facilities. We had a lot of balls leaving the property. So with that consultant, they came in, they mapped the course, they identified a number of improvements that should, if implemented, reduce the number of balls leaving the course. So we have still projects identified as part of that plan that need to be implemented. Some of those are included in this capital program, some are not.
I guess I need to know which ones aren't, and why aren't they? And
I think if we were going to take this conversation further, and if you wanted us to come up with a much more extensive capital program, we could do that. Staff have not put that kind of time into this. We do feel that this is a very good capital plan for what we have and maintaining what we have.
So as part of the long-term projections, I guess where I'm going with this is at some point those debt costs are gone. And if we're properly putting money aside to avoid future debt, we won't have those debt costs in the future, except for these extraordinary expenses like replacing the clubhouse.
That would be correct.
And I guess, that I would assume is a 40, 50-year life building kind of equation. So it's kind of irrelevant for the conversation we're having today. And I guess it's in that context, it's just reassuring we don't need to worry about that. So the timing issue is, when does that debt end that we can capture that $200,000 a year revenue as part of this equation? And it's not within the 10 years that we're talking about. It's after that.
It is, and we have some charts that will show
There we
that
go.
to you.
Thank you.
So,
I'm sorry. Because I think that Mr. Hart's points are good, one, that we do need to have a full ecological view of this situation. This is one of those inflection points, as you say. We're looking at next June is a decision moment. So to have that sense of that, all those projects that are, they're not on this radar, and yet they're projects, and they are in a master plan. I would think that we would somehow, to make these decisions wisely, these long-term decisions wisely, that we would at least have those placeholder numbers to be working with.
Ms. Rapp, is the golf master plan available in digital form?
yes, it is.
Okay. Maybe you could send each of the committee members the link to that?
Be happy to do that.
That would be great. Thank you.
And just to revisit, these are the golf fund reserves in 2012, 13, and 14. We have been below policy reserves since 2008, and we do have projections that, depending on what happens with play, we could exhaust Gulf Fund reserves within the next 12 to 18 months. And this slide gives you that overview of what could happen. The bars, red bars being policy reserves, what we are projecting for income and expenses and what the policy level would be, and where we would see the reserve level be based on 2% growth year over year from 2014. No change in play, which I think is probably most likely, or we could see a continued decline, 2%. So in all of those scenarios assume a $1 fee increase per year, which we haven't always done, and I'm not sure is sustainable given the competitive market that we're in. And this is the chart that staff put together that show you what, with all the assumptions being that play starts with the 2014 basis of about 59,000 paid rounds at the golf course, that we have our continued city workforce, that we don't have exceptional drought impacts on play, so we didn't include that in the projections, the $1 per year fee increase, the funded capital, and the debt which retires partially in 2018 and partially in 2022. And this chart does show that if play stays flat, that by 2023 we might be back into a positive situation for the golf course. But realistically, looking at that detailed chart, we could be looking at a need for subsidy that ranges from $100,000 to $500,000 per year, which would be 5 to 25% of the golf operating budget. The difficulty is we really don't know what's going to happen with play. Again, we've seen a national decline. The golf industry is projecting flat or at best a 1% growth, all factors being considered. This decline in play is affecting all golf courses, whether they're private or public. And so it's a trend that we're in. So, but we were hoping that this would kind of give you a better sense of, worst case, best case situation.
I had a question. Is the consultant that did the report still on call to the city for additional questions, or is this a finished product that's been paid for and done?
The Chair Member Hart, the consultant is still working for us. We are planning to have him be present at the City Council presentation on December 9th. Mm-hmm. If you had a particular question for additional information, we'd be happy to see what we could do to pull that together.
One thing that occurred to me that wasn't in the report is, the golf industry projections of growth. I'd love to know, going back 10 years, what the golf industry was saying about growth and then what actually happened. Because I think that, that would help with the credibility of that prediction today.
We'd be happy to get that. I can tell you pretty much, I think they had very much a kind of sunshine perspective. Mm-hmm. And I think that year over year of decline has changed that, and they've been much more conservative. Because I can remember, 3 or 4 years ago, them saying, they were projecting a 2 to 4%, increase. And, we're just not seeing that kind of growth. And now I just was reading some additional reports put together for the city of Oxnard and another city up north, and very similarly flat to 1%. But we'll ask him to see if he can put that together. So this leads us to basically 2 questions. Whether or not City Council would want to provide some level of subsidy from the general fund, either putting the golf course itself as a general fund program or leaving the golf course as an enterprise fund and providing a level of subsidy to keep the golf course operating in the black year over year. And two, if not, would council consider an alternate operating model, which the major difference between the different models would be non-city maintenance, because we currently do provide maintenance using city employees, which increases our operating costs compared to other models.
Is there any reason to have the, if you went for option one and had a subsidy, is there any reason to retain the enterprise fund and just have the general fund subsidize it? It seems like an artificial accounting exercise.
I think it would be, it's probably a question to ask the finance department. I think from a staff perspective, I would say as Parks and Recreation Director, having general fund programs and an enterprise fund, which stands a little bit more alone and there's a higher level of concern for cost recovery. Mm-hmm. I would say for an interim measure, I probably would lean more towards providing a subsidy until we see what happens, in a few more years with the sport of golf. And I will say, and as we get into this, we are seeing other cities doing the same thing. So they're not, some are moving the golf course into the general fund, but more commonly we're seeing that the general fund is providing a level of subsidy. And I think the golf industry is in flux. And we are certainly not at the level where we're saying, let's not have a golf course at all. We are not there at all. And the play at our course is very good. In fact, we get more play at our course than most other courses. So it's just comparatively, and in our financial structure, we're having, the fiscal challenges. So the last time that we were here, the Finance Committee members asked if we could provide a little bit more information on Parks and Recreation General Fund subsidy. So what you see before you is the Parks and Recreation General Fund budget, which includes administration, parks, and recreation. The golf course and the Creeks Fund are both separately funded, not receiving general fund support. So the general fund provides a 63% subsidy overall for the Parks and Recreation Department. And you can see that it varies by division, with the Recreation Division having the lowest level of subsidy, primarily because of the number of activities and park and facility rentals and all of that revenue, which comes back to help offset our operating costs. And as you know, we do provide a higher level of subsidy for programs and services serving the general community. The example that I gave is we don't charge people when they show up at a park. The city pays for that. The city pays for the maintenance and everything associated for people to visit that park. However, if you want to have an event at a park and you want a facility reservation, then you get charged a fee. And within recreation programs, we subsidize mostly at 100% level programs that are a high priority for City Council to provide to the community and make them and keep them accessible. So our summer fun drop-in program, the after-school sports program at the elementary schools, those are some examples of fully subsidized programs. And the fees that we set generally recover all of the direct costs to offer that activity, and they contribute to the facility maintenance and operation. They are not recovering fully all of the city's costs. So a swim lesson at Los Baños, a dance class at Carrillo is not paying its fair share of the city's costs to maintain those facilities. And that's, we think that that's appropriate. That's the cost that the city has for offering and maintaining those various recreation facilities.
Mr. White.
Thank you. And in this chart, it shows that the administration division is 94% subsidized, but are we loading the recreation 45% with a portion of the administration costs, or are we leaving all of those out and having the administration be an isolated bubble that's getting all of this? So what we do with everything else, just as you were talking about previously, there's a general load put on each department to keep things going. As you were saying, HR, blah blah blah. What do we do? Just so we're doing apples to apples, how are we looking at this?
Thank you. And so the answer would be no. This doesn't do a full spread of then we wouldn't have administrative costs because it would be spread across all of the other divisions. So the administrative costs are just the department administration, and the recreation division includes management related to that division, similar with parks. So it's not a true spread of costs for cost recovery, but it's basically how our and it doesn't include any city overhead or anything like that. It's just our straight costs.
I guess then I have to ask the question, why isn't it 100% subsidized? Where is a revenue stream for administration?
The administration revenue comes from, because we manage all of our capital projects in the administration division, and so some of those project management services are actually budgeted in the capital program, so revenue from those programs comes into the administration division. That's primarily it. And then in trying to get to what you were looking for when we were last here, you wanted to know how the golf course as a recreation service compared to maybe some of the other recreation services. So staff decided that it was probably cleanest to look at Los Baños pool and the tennis courts and then the golf course. And we looked at the slide doesn't have as much detail as your staff report in terms of, all the different aspects that were included. But you can see Los Baños pool, showers, lockers, weight room, offices. Tennis courts have lights and shower and lockers and restrooms, and we have tennis courts at the municipal tennis facility. We have tennis courts at Pershing, but the city doesn't pay for maintenance of those. That's actually our joint use agreement with City College. They maintain those courts. The lights, however, are ours, and the cost to operate the lights, so that's in the tennis budget. And we have the 2 courts at Oak Park, so that comprises tennis. And then golf, you have the 18-hole course, the driving range, the pro shop, the restaurant, the restrooms, et cetera. So a fairly complex facility comparison. It's really interesting when I put this together and I looked at programs because all 3 entities do much of the same thing. Lessons, camps, clinics, group activities. They allow for casual drop-in activities. They do some facility rentals. The golf course doesn't really do a facility rental. The Los Baños pool is a supervised facility. The tennis courts, I would say, are partially supervised and not really supervised at the level that the golf course and Los Baños are. Both of those facilities don't operate without staff or the concession staff in a supervisory capacity. I mean, you can go to city tennis courts and there's not a staff person there. The audience is youth to seniors. In each case, they do special programs for all three, youth, adults, and seniors. You can see there's a big difference in cost. We were able to isolate out the cost for Los Baños from the aquatics budget, so I think what you see there is pretty accurate. And the revenue that's generated at Los Baños and tennis. And the general fund subsidy, 56% at Los Baños and 68% with the tennis program. And trying to get a rough idea of participations, and this is not individuals. So, numerous people go to all three of those facilities every, a regular basis. But Los Baños has over 100,000 participations a year. Tennis, this is rough because we have a lot of people who just show up and play, but we're guessing probably about 38,000, and golf, we're going by the number of rounds. So it just really is kind of a snapshot and just shows a lot of similarities and some of the differences.
So everybody, the 105,000 people that go through Los Baños and the 62,000 that go through the golf, you know those precisely because you can't get in without paying or you flashing a card. The tennis, as you mentioned, is different because you can.
Yes.
How did you come up with the 37.5?
We asked the tennis services coordinator to go through all of her activities where she has registrations or regular league participations. Mm-hmm. And so she totaled all of that up. We looked at the annual permits and daily permits that are sold. So we kind of came up with what we knew and what we thought was on top of that. So if anything, the tennis number is low.
Mr. White. A comment on that, you were saying that there aren't any events at the golf facility. I would argue that it wouldn't be hard to get to the place where the Mulligan's events contributes to the revenue and ends up helping the bottom line of the whole facility in some way. And so that would be at least a kind of a bank shot event that's helpful to the.
I would agree, and we didn't include we didn't ask Mulligan's for the number of people that attend their events. So we really,
but there is a nice revenue stream off of that facility, which offsets some of the other activities.
Yes, so. And golf tournaments are included in the number of rounds, so that's already included. We did want to share with you some additional information that we've been gathering from some of our compatriots in the golf industry. And in going through our files, we also found some reports and studies that have been done. And I've actually contacted the National Golf Foundation and asked them if they have some updated statistics on this as we're going through this. So hopefully when we come to council, we'll actually have some updated numbers. But there was a report prepared by the National Golf Foundation called Emerging Trends in Municipal Golf that came out in December of 2013. And they basically, indicated that muni courses operated as enterprise funds were increasingly unable to meet their expenses. And the trends that they were seeing, because the National Golf Foundation also does consulting, similar to Proforma Golf that did our golf consultant report, the trends that they were seeing is increased outsourcing of golf operations and or golf course maintenance to a private operator, forgiveness of large accumulated debt accrued by the golf courses, by the general fund, and folding of golf operations back into the general fund. So that was kind of interesting. And just recently, we did a little research, and I will say these numbers that you see are from the CAFR reports online from fiscal year 2013. We're in the process of trying to get some updated information from both the city of Oxnard and the city of Ventura. Now, their golf courses are all operated under a contract, and they have no city maintenance. They are really some of our primary competition. They are known for being well-run and competitively priced, and they also have heavy debt related to capital investment. The Ventura courses were recently renovated in the, I want to say 2004, 5, something like that. Might have been a little bit later. And subsidy has been provided by the general fund to each of these operations over the last few years. And so the records for the city of Oxnard, the general fund provided $1.3 million in subsidy to the River Ridge Golf Course, which was about 27% of their operating costs. And Ventura similarly, $500,000, which is about 11%. So it's just interesting to gather some of this information, and we'll be looking to see what they've done for FY14 and what they're planning. But clearly, we are seeing similar trends.
So your sense is in those two instances that subsidy is related to forgiving capital debt?
Well, I think a couple things. In comparing them to us, just, they're operated contracts, so they don't have any city maintenance costs, so that's one difference. And they are similarly, although I'm sure they had a financial plan that showed they could generate revenue with the capital investment and pay that back, but they've seen all the same trends that we have with the decline in play. And so they have had to rely on the general fund to help them out through this time. So that's what we understand their situation to be.
Well, that will be very helpful to know more about precisely, because I think they're different in that they have the management contracts, but they also have a capital debt that they're trying to deal with, and we have the capital debt. So I'd like to know, and ironically, they're subsidizing their operations with their managed contracts. Their subsidy is significant. I mean, those are big numbers, and we have no subsidy. So that's very interesting.
Yes.
We need to know why that is, because if the management model is so much more efficient, why would those numbers be so big, other than a capital cost that was being carried?
I think the numbers are big because of the trends in golf that's affecting everyone. And I think that's why their numbers are big. They had the debt and then the same revenue challenges that we are having.
The other point to note is that they both carry 2 golf courses, so they're twice the size of us.
Okay. 36 holes instead of 18. That's a good
Could be true.
Insight. And then just it's nothing more than a little add-on to what Mr. Hart's talking about is that are those numbers roughly an offset of the payments, of the debt payments being for that these courses are making? Is the 1.3 they've got a debt of 1.3, and of course maybe the same thing occurred where a general fund or the city money was loaned to that golf course, and then they're paying it back. So just are those numbers, how do they compare to the offset of the debt payments? Just as a
So we will, as I said, we've asked them for more information, and we have not been able to get that, but this is what their CAFR shows. So just very quickly, the report that you have from the consultant goes through all the different operating models. I am not going to go through them extensively. That's not the conversation that we're having now, but I did want to just highlight some key points. So Santa Barbara operates under a hybrid, which is the name of a model. We have city maintenance, our golf operations, which is the daily operation of the golf course through the pro shop, is done by concession with Chris Tallarico, and food and beverage is a concession with Mulligan's, and then the city provides the management oversight. And the strengths and weaknesses of each of those models, and just very, very briefly, one of the strengths of our current model is that we have a high level of city control. At the same time, the limitations and the weaknesses are that with 3 entities invested in the success of the golf course, it can become a challenge, and we have limited ability to adapt and respond to a dynamic market. We have potential conflicts of multiple concessionaires. That's one of the challenges. I have really appreciated the relationship that we've had with the director of golf and Mulligan's over the last few years, but I know that they would agree with me that it's been difficult for us to agree on some of our marketing strategies and who pays for what and what's the loss leader and, you know, who benefits. And that's just to be expected because it's basically 3 businesses trying to come together to have a mutual decision and outcome. And then, of course, we have the higher salary costs for public employees. The next model is simply the city's model with the hybrid with contract maintenance. And so that's basically the one difference would be that we would have less investment in salary and benefits. It would reduce our cost. Oh, and I will just say, I meant to say that working with our consultant, we did ask him what % of courses were which models, and he is most familiar with Southern California. So these numbers reflect Southern California. So 6% of the municipal courses are the city's model, 6% are the city's model with contract maintenance. And then moving on to the management agreement, The management agreement has a private operator for all 4 entities. Essentially, the city would contract with a professional golf management company, and they would manage the golf course for the city. It would be for a designated management fee and then with revenue enhancements, incentives. And the revenues and the expenses are still the city's expenses, but the management company is providing those services, so not using city employees for any of those services. This is the most common model being adopted by municipal golf courses in today's market. The trend that has been that we've been hearing about and that golf consultants are saying is that this is the direction that a lot of cities are going to. And 23% of the municipal courses in Southern California are under the management agreement model. So the benefits are you have one entity running a providing professional golf management services. You have the private sector wage and benefit structure. Those are your pluses. On the downside, we retain our level of financial risk for the city, and it requires still for the city to have some level of management The cities that we've talked to that have this model, they still have somebody who's doing the contract management on the city's end to make sure that it's still operating in benefit to the city. The last model that we would spend much time on today is the facility lease. This is the least common model used today, although you will see that 57% of the municipal courses have this model. Most of those leases were established many years ago with 20 to 30-year terms, and the leases are generally used when the private entity is being asked to invest a significant amount of capital into the course. So we're not seeing that represents what the situation is for the city of Santa Barbara. But you can see how it differs, and I think in the chart and the information in the report is pretty self-explanatory. And the last model is included in the consultant's report, but it's not something that staff are seeing is financially feasible given the golf market today. And that would be full self-operation. And there are courses that are still, albeit a limited number of cities that do a full self-operation, including food and beverage and the pro shop and maintenance. So the consultant put together various economic comparisons looking at the different models, and based on the figures that you see, those are thousands of 2014 dollars, showing 4 models, the annual cash flow, and then showing minus what the city currently has in place. And these are rough numbers, the best that we could put together working with the consultant based on what we knew for city expenses and his familiarity with the golf industry and similar agreements. So you can see that the difference would range between roughly $200,000 to $400,000 a year to the city, depending on the model. If you take that number and you apply it back to that table where we show the structural deficit and how that would change, it comes into play. The biggest difference being that in the last 3 models, you don't have public employee salary and benefit costs, and that's the main difference. And we did have a discussion with the city attorney as to whether or not the living wage applied. When the consultant was doing his report, we did not have a determination from the city attorney, and it is his opinion in reviewing the living wage ordinance itself. It does exempt contracted service for recreation services, of which we would consider operating the golf course, the community golf course, being a recreation service. So, of course, that would be a council decision, but that's where we are at this time. So, it just again gives you some numbers. If council is interested in exploring this further, we'll come back with additional information. So I wanted to also let you know where we are. Staff made a presentation and provided all of this information that you received today to the Golf Advisory Committee at their meeting earlier, I guess last week. And then tomorrow we are giving the Parks and Recreation Commission a status report on this discussion. We feel that there is a lot of interest in the community for what's going on, so we're just keeping people in the loop and providing information. We are going to City Council for direction on December 9th. We've scheduled it at 6 p.m. so that people who are interested can attend. And again, we need direction, staff need direction no later than June 2015. And we are asking the Finance Committee today, first off, if there is additional information that you would like when this comes to City Council, please let us know anything that you haven't already mentioned. And we are asking that you provide a recommendation to City Council for how staff should move forward with addressing the financial challenges before the golf course. And we're happy to answer any questions that you have.
Okay, very good. So we'll have questions from the committee first and then any public comment. So, Mr. White?
The self-funded courses, I was just kind of trying to muddle my way along this pile. And I see, for example, that Los Angeles County has 5 self-operated courses.
Yes.
But I'm recalling, is it somewhere like Sunnyvale was the only sort of comparable sized community that does it? I'm presuming then that in the case of Los Angeles County, that's like a country having 5 courses underneath it. Obviously, it's a drop in its financial bucket. And then the Sunnyvale, it's the wealthiest, one of the wealthiest communities out there, so that they $1 million here, $1 million there is not a concern to them at this point. But I am just trying to look for the straightest apples to apples comparison of course. And of course you talked about the Ventura ones, and maybe that's why you gave as much information about that. Is that in your view the closest comparison to our situation here? Or is it just because it's a competitor, I suppose? That's another reason why.
Committee Member White, I think in the consultant's report, he selected a number of courses that were local that really compared best to Santa Barbara. And he used those, he separates them out also by Northern California and Southern California. So I think there's a lot of information in there on comparisons. And like I said, we'll have him be present at the council meeting, and he can speak more specifically.
Yeah, I felt like I found myself being confused in this collection of material as often as I was being enlightened. So I guess that's not a question. That just is
a lot of information.
Yeah. And there's so many variables that are being presented to us that it's hard to get it down to a as I use my primitive terms of apples to apples. So I'm going to be at the pre-questioning mode for the moment, Mr. Chair, until I hear what you folks.
Mr. Hart, do you have any questions?
I just had one question. In looking at the management agreement information, revenue and expense information, what is the standard industry profit margin for those management agreements?
That would be a question for our consultant. I don't think that I would feel comfortable, and I don't know that Mark would, but we'll ask him to come prepared to answer that.
Okay.
I do know that since we've been having this kind of conversation with the consultant, and we've actually used this consultant in the last few times that the city has gone out with an RFP for the director of golf or renegotiated the director of golf salaries or contracts rather, that those minimum payments have actually declined. So as the golf industry is declining and fewer people are playing, then those contracts have become less favorable to the city than they once were.
But that would be a transparent number. I mean, these are public documents. You can know precisely exactly what we're talking about. Okay,
yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Are there any members of the public wishing to speak on this topic? Please. Lectern. And please state your name for the record.
Good afternoon. Thank you for letting me speak today. My main concern is about...
Name, sir?
Oh, excuse me. David Niles. I'm a resident of Santa Barbara. And the reason I'm here today is basically to... because I'm concerned about any public park being leased to a private for-profit group. And I think basically the narrowness of the report largely focuses on, this is a 108-acre park in the center of Santa Barbara that's currently being used for golf. And so I would say prior to leasing it to a private group, it should be the obligation of the city to look at all alternatives for this 108-acre park in the middle of Santa Barbara. Soccer, baseball, picnics, any other revenue-generating activities that could be hybridized. And so, and basically the methodology of a private lease in the form of a very pointed report to a three-member financial committee that's going to refer to the city council about the decision of a possible private lease of a public park, I think is excluding public comment, public education, public input, and any creative ideas the public could bring to the table. So I feel like the public's being circumvented when a few people at a midday finance committee, then a consent calendar hearing at city council make a decision about the private lease and a 20 to 30 year fate of our public park. So I hope the golf survives. I support subsidizing the golf and keeping it within the city park system, and that prior to any consideration of a private lease of our public parks, that all viable alternatives other than golf be studied and reported back to the community. And I think the city of Santa Barbara, the citizens should have, just like today, a better forum, and there should be meetings, and we should be able to have input on what our public parks are used for. So if golf isn't sustainable, let's create another use, because there is a myriad of uses that the city of Santa Barbara public could come up with in that beautiful setting. So appreciate your time today, and please reject any private lease of our public parks. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak? Please come forward. Oh, we've got two folks. Go ahead. Hi. And your name is?
My name is Brian Henson. I currently sit on the Golf Course Advisory Committee, as well as the newly formed Players Improvement Fund Subcommittee.
Doesn't sound like it's on. Is it on?
And I am also a marshal of nearly 10 years at the golf course. The city of Santa Barbara is a destination location, and Muni, with its rich history and spectacular views, can also be a destination location. Revitalization is required to keep local golfers interested and to entice out-of-town play, as is the case in the newly renovated Ventura courses. After reviewing the status report, I realized that the decision before you is a difficult one. And while I recognize the substantial savings from contracting out maintenance, I fear the loss of a superintendent would be detrimental to Muni's greatest asset, its greens. I fear the inevitable lack of maintenance, if contracted, would further drive down play. Simi Hills learned this lesson and returned to city maintenance from a contract management. And I know this not from the report, which it states in there, but from personal communications with the president of Simi Hills Men's Golf Club during a recent competition. Torrey Pines and Harding Park are two examples of enterprise funds like Muni. Both are renowned destination courses. And I wonder how much the cities of San Francisco and San Diego have invested into their Munis. While Santa Barbara Golf Club is no Torrey Pines, it does have the potential to be a truly great gem. Revitalization is already in progress through the Players Improvement Fund and slated capital improvements. And while the immediate numbers are bleak, the near future is bright. And I urge the committee to consider subsidizing potential losses as it has done with the Los Baños pool and tennis courts. The drought and economy have weakened Muni's fiscal outlook. However, a cut in service and golf course care could be the final blow. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
Hi. My name is Rick Selazny. I'm a resident of Santa Barbara. I've only been here a year, but I've lived in Northern California, Southern California, and I've played golf almost all my life. I think you got to recognize that some of these numbers, you got to put them in perspective. The 62,000, that is a lot of play. 100,000 was extraordinary. The average I've read is about 35,000 for golf courses. So this course should be able to be sustaining. And it is a good golf course. It's not great, but it's good. And it's an asset to the city, and more people use it than just the golf. I mean, that Mulligan's is a community location. It's got a beautiful spot. People from all ages and businessmen, retirees, people go there for lunch. They go there to hang out. This is a major part of the city landscape. I really think when you look at these alternatives, I respect what he said, but I think you can do the maintenance. I mean, when you're paying $900,000 to $1 million a year compared to the numbers I saw in the paper, 400 to 500,000, double the amount of cost. That's it in a nutshell. You just can't sustain. You need a course that is sustainable, and sustainable means you can't have city workers. I mean, you have to. There's a lot of issues to be contended with there, but you have to have the model that allows the course to be sustainable. I don't think you need to subsidize it. I think you need to change the structure of the maintenance, because that's an extraordinary amount of money. I think you can do it without losing good maintenance if you have the right kind of contract, and that's the way it should go, because that course, you know, I play it once a week, probably, and the men's club is active. There's a lot of people that go there. Again, it's a great asset to the city. It needs to be put on a different footing so that this conversation doesn't take place every year or two. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other speakers, please?
Hi, I'm Dr. Karen Van Hoek. I'm a local physician. I'm also a member of the Las Positas Tennis Group. And I just want to be sure that what happened to the Las Positas Tennis Facility doesn't happen to the golf course. We had our courts given to Elings Park Foundation, private entity, and we don't want the same thing to happen to the golf course. City Charter 520 states that no land acquired by the city or dedicated to public park or recreation purposes shall be sold, leased, or otherwise transferred unless authorized by affirmative votes of at least a majority of the electors voting on such proposition at a general or special election. So any lease of the Santa Barbara Municipal Golf Course, a public recreation facility, must therefore be approved by the voters. Don't let what happened to the Las Positas Tennis Facility happen to the golf course. Our courts were given to Elings Park Foundation in a simple calendar consent vote. I watched the tapes by the City Council. There was no discussion at all during these meetings, during this transfer. There was no public input. Why doesn't Parks and Recreation have a public meeting involving the golfing community to look at options for how the golf course could be more profitable? An example might be having only a 9-hole golf course, which would mean less maintenance costs. This type of meeting should have occurred with the now displaced tennis players at the Las Positas. We would gladly have paid a little more for passes or paid for the night lights, but that wasn't given us. That option wasn't given to us. Huge decisions over multi-million-dollar assets are being made without proper public notification or input. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, back to the committee. Oh, please.
Afternoon. My name is Pete Lamantia, and I help coordinate junior programs at the municipal golf course. And I just want to say, you know, for the kids, this place is just phenomenal. I think in the past 4 years or so that I've worked there, we've probably seen most of our programs, like the First Tee, the Russ Morrison program, double in activity. A lot more course play for the kids. You know, they'll come out. Tournaments as well. I work with Santa Barbara Junior Golf. That's a summer program. We have a couple of our events that are hosted at Muni. And we have well over 110 kids in that program alone for the summer. The future of golf, you know, you think about what attracts people. I grew up around in the 1980s or so when you couldn't get a reservation on a golf course unless you were just Johnny on the spot, made that phone call at 6 o'clock in the morning. I understand 100,000 plays, but that's off the charts. That would be filling up every single tee time imaginable. I mean, right now you're looking at something probably like about 6 hours or so of full tee times for the 62,000 plays that you're getting at Muni. And it seems like from what I was trying to learn today, approximately like $400,000 the committee feels could be achieved by changing the structure of how the course is run. But I'd like to submit, like the junior program is growing, what about, with the adult programs, types of things that we can do to attract more people into the golf course. I think we're only looking at maybe about a 10% increase, maybe 30 more plays a day under the current model and breaking even. Or even the possibility of raising the green fees just a couple of dollars, but adding a few more programs to it so people wouldn't say, wow, it went up $2. They'd say, hey, look, we're even getting more for what we're paying for at Muni. So I just like to throw that on the table as another way to, take a look at the situation that you have in front of you, because I don't think the numbers when I see 2.1 million to 2 million, that's not a big discrepancy. I mean, I'd worry about if it was a shortfall of like $500,000 or something in that amount. But I don't think we're that far away that with a little bit of work with the current model, the situation might just, in the next year or two, resolve itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, please.
I'm Cynthia Goena from SEIU Local 620, and I'm a little bit new to this issue. We just heard about it. We are planning to have a meet and confer on behalf of our public employees whose livelihoods and jobs are being put on the line right now. You've been given a proposal to contract out their jobs, and we are in opposition to that. I think you'll find if you look over examples where this has occurred in other places that you don't get the same quality, you don't get the same devotion, you don't have the same control. And when you have an enterprise that needs all of those things, you should stick with the public employees that are doing a fine job and are not responsible for the shortcomings that you're being asked to address. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other public comment? Okay. Back to the committee for our comments. Okay. Mr. Hart, what do you have to say?
Well, I really appreciate you bringing this item forward. I think that you're being very wise and cautious looking ahead. I think I understand this better now where we are in this inflection point, and I don't think that we have a crisis at all. I think we have a tremendous asset that lots of people are taking advantage of, and we're bucking bigger trends. This is a lot of similarities that we run into at the airport, where there are just national phenomenon that are affecting us in terms of air service. And despite the best efforts of the airport staff to add flights, the industry is changing, and we're trying to adapt to that. So the same thing is occurring here. As far as I'm concerned, I don't think that the right answer is to fully privatize the golf course. I think there may be some opportunities with the management agreement model that would be a hybrid that would involve keeping city employees and having potentially the other services operated under one contract. I've talked to a lot of people about this in this business, and I keep hearing the word synergy that may come from cross promotions and doing loss leader situations with food and beverages or the other way to boost revenue at the restaurant, things like that. On the other hand, I see in the report from the consultant that the restaurant actually is doing very well. And so I don't know that there's synergy in that context. There may be synergy on the golf side, but it might be at the expense of the operation of the restaurant. But I do understand how those connect, and I think there's something to be looked at in that and more conversations to be had about that model. And fundamentally, I think this comes down to a kind of a philosophical thing. Are we going to privatize and assume the cost of the profit involved in having these operations privatized at the expense of city employees? And philosophically, I'm not going to go there. But I would like to know more about the reality of this general fund subsidy that's occurring around us. These golf courses in Ventura County, because the fact that the golf fund is an enterprise fund is the only reason that these capital expenditures are debt to the golf fund as opposed to any other recreation program. Those would all be capital projects that would be coming from the city's general fund. And if we didn't have that debt service, we wouldn't be having this conversation, even with, I think, some of the fairly aggressive declines in use. I mean, if we put that chart back up and we pulled out $300,000 a year in debt service payments, we would be in the black for the full 10 years under most of those pessimistic golf rider or users play scenarios. So I think, just from a fairness standpoint, golf was created as an enterprise fund because it was profitable, and folks that were in the golf community wanted to retain the revenues from golf and have that reinvested in the golf operation. That made perfect sense at that time. That apparently doesn't seem to be the trend any longer. And so having golf under the obligation of having that 100% subsidy separate from every other Parks and Recreation program seems like a very large burden to carry, when in fact what we're really talking about is people having fun recreating one way or the other, whether they're swimming at the pool, whether they're playing tennis, whether they're playing golf, whether they're dancing at Cabrillo Ballroom. They're all just the same kind of activities. And it was striking when Ms. Rapp put the chart on there, what happens at each of these facilities. The same thing happens at each of these facilities. They just differently. So I think that's the most fair way to look at this, is really to say the city provides recreation to improve the quality of life of residents. There's a lot of people that use this golf course, and this is the core of their recreational experience, and I want to protect that to the greatest extent possible. And I think you're being wise and smart and putting all this stuff on the table, but I don't, other than the fact that we have these leases coming up in 2016, I don't see the crisis. I see looking ahead and planning and carefully ahead, but the urgency of that is different in my mind than I think the public may feel, because of the disconnect between having a conversation and being smart and planning ahead, and then the impression in the public being we're going to do something drastic with the golf course. For example, Mr. Niles, concern that, or even interest perhaps, in turning the golf course into something else. I mean, that's not even on the table at all in my mind, under any circumstances. This is a completely valid, viable recreational resource. We're going to keep it that way. We're just going to try and figure out how to either subsidize it or make it more efficient through synergy. At least that, from my perspective, as one council member.
Thank you. Mr. White?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Anecdotally, this is the stories I heard was that the city of Santa Barbara had a municipal golf course before the Great Depression, before the crash of the Great Depression. And the city lost it. It basically went bankrupt and was lost. And we now, these now, 90 years later, we have a course, and I am certainly intent upon maintaining a full-fledged golf course there. I think that's it's a neat resource, and it's part of our array of facilities that we present here. So I appreciate, I think the creativity of, we are also very short on playfields. This is perhaps our largest single shortage is in the area of playfields. So I appreciate the creativity of trying to come up with an alternative strategy. But from my perspective, this is when you break this up, you shatter it. You don't just keep anything resembling golf going. And I think also there's a possibility that one of these private courses will cease to exist. Competing private courses in the area will cease to exist in reasonable time. So so I'm optimistic. I'm going to just be more on the optimistic end of golf on this course. I am interested in, and I'm also interested in the city maintaining substantial control over it. I hear from Ms. Rapp that there are situations where there's difficulty in the three or entities coordinating, and I want to hear more about that and how and why there would be benefits in there being fewer than three. They seem to be three sort of focal areas, and so it seems to me that's how I would look at it if I were sort of going forward with managing. But I want to hear more about okay, you say that there are problems there. Are there problems to be solved by there being, both the golf and the restaurant being contracted out together, shall we say? But as I say, from my perspective, at least there should be city direct involvement in the managing of this operation. I think it's there's less of a crisis, I think, as Mr. Hart said, than we've heard about. The area where I am interested in improving our bottom line is in contracting out some services. Is there a way to run this, as we've seen all throughout Southern California, is there a way to do some of the work with contract? And I'm interested to see that the living wage is brought in as a piece of this puzzle, even though it's not a requirement. That becomes at least a something to discuss. I've been sort of skeptical about the living wage activity, and yet waiting to hear how it is playing out. I know a study is supposed to happen one of these years about its effect, but that's at least one way to look at the contracting out of some services in order to make this not a subsidized operation. I think that one of the reasons why we see it, the numbers that we see today, is I think it's been pretty darn well run for a number of years. I would imagine that's what happened in Ventura is people either used to consume some of the resources there in some fashion and created a debt in the past, as we have seen in other situations in our financial system here. And the other ingredient was excessive optimism at some point 10 to 12 years ago, saying, wow, golf is going up 3% a year. Let's dump millions of dollars into the course, and then now the piper needs to be paid for that. So I would like to see this course breaking even. I don't think it needs to be a big revenue generator for the city. I think it should be a revenue neutral operation, and so that would be one way that I could see getting there. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. White. It will not be easy for this committee to provide a recommendation to City Council on how staff should move forward, but I think that we have the information here that we need to make a decision. I agree with Mr. White that the goal should be for the golf course to be self-sustaining in terms of finances. I think it can be. Whatever adjustments that may require, and I know that we've talked about the possibility of contracting out maintenance as an obvious possibility, since that's what most golf courses in this situation do. That's something that we should look at. And for Ms. Guena's benefit, we've talked about this before, and the idea would not be to put these people out on the street, but find other positions for them within the city. That seems like the most obvious move to me, and that's what I think City Council should look at. But I think that the golf course plays a significant enough role in the city's recreation program and the history of the city that this is really something that the full council is going to have to evaluate and come to a decision on. I also agree with one of the members of the public who mentioned that he believes that this is something that needs full public discussion. Obviously, I agree with that as well, and it will be, we don't need to come to a final decision on this until we approve a budget. So we do have ample time to schedule public outreach, public workshops, and I think that should be definitely a part of whatever we do here. So if someone wants to formulate a recommendation, vague or ambiguous, I will.
Okay, well, I'd like
I would
first
entertain
of all,
that.
to just add to what you were saying about public exposure. This is also going to the Parks and Recreation Commission. Is this not, again, Ms. Rapp?
Chair White, yes, it is as a status report. assuming that at some point council would direct us to go out and do more public outreach, we would probably do a combined Golf Advisory Committee, Parks and Recreation Commission large meeting. So we if that is the direction to gather more public input, then that's what we're thinking would take place.
Well, and I just totally agree with the comments that have been made about making sure that we get this word out as broad as possible and get as much input as possible. That is definitely it's important, and this is a big deal to our community. So absolutely, I support that. And I would make the motion that the Finance Committee recommends that the golf course, the path that is taken for the golf course be a self-sustaining one over the long term. I feel like, not sure that Mr. Hart agrees with that, but that would be at least one thing that we may. It sounds like Mr. Francisco and I have that as one piece that's for going forward, and that the most likely place to look for savings is in a maintenance contract. So that would be the motion that I would make.
Okay. Well, I guess the only thing I would say is that I don't think we I personally am not ready to make a motion like that. I think that there were a number of questions that we had today that I'd like more information about before moving forward. I think one of the other interesting aspects of this report that we didn't talk about at all was demographic change in the community in relation to golf. And there's a section of the report that talks about, the baby boomer population retiring, having more time available, having more disposable income per capita than other communities. I think that's a potential source of increased play at the golf course that we didn't talk about that makes us perhaps a little bit different. I don't know why the consultant didn't evaluate that more and come to more conclusions. I mean, the information's there, but there really wasn't anything in the report that said, well, because of that, we will do better than other areas or not. And I find all of that stuff missing from making a decision at this point in time. And so I think, and again, I think everybody here agrees this is a really important question, and it deserves full vetting and public information. I don't understand the timetable that we're rushing toward. I don't know why we need to have this in council on December 9th. I think, again, the decision point is about next June. Right. I'd rather take more time and have this vetted better than moving forward on this timetable that we have in front of us.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
I will second the motion.
Thank you.
And I will also add that I think that bringing this before council in December will facilitate public discussion, not cut it off, right. And that this will just be the first of many discussions on this topic, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's just where I was going to go, is that this is getting it to council means just a broader exposure of the issue, which I think is, this is one of the best attended finance committee meetings we've ever had. So thank you, all of you, for showing up, by the way, today for this. And this is, if we can just keep this growing through several sessions, I think getting it to council starts to accomplish that. I appreciate the questions you're asking about demographics. My reading of the demographic material in here was that we boomers are fizzling enough so that we're not playing as much golf as we used to. But I'm open to hearing more, study and having you ask. I appreciate the point you're coming from, and I know that your brain will come up with more tough questions on this issue, and I look forward to those questions being asked and that all of us struggling with it, because this needs to be a fully vetted conversation.
And in the meantime, we have a motion on the table. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? No. Motion passes 2-1. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Thank you very much for being here today. City Council starts in 6